And again, welcome to today's webinar, everybody. Accelerating Mobile Application Development and Delivery with AWS Mobile Hub. Our presenter today is Dennis Hills. And today with us, we also have a team of moderators who will help engage with you and answer any questions you have. Their names are Peter, Karthik, and Weston. If you have any questions, let them know at any time, again, by submitting those into the Q&A pod on your screen. And now, Dennis, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Again, my name is Dennis, and I'm a mobile developer advocate with AWS Mobile. And thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. And it's great to be a mobile developer advocate because I get to work with developers like you and go back and work with our developers and work on roadmaps and issues and just understand the mobile ecosystem and excited about mobile development. So today, I want to talk to you about the quick overview of some of the mobile users on AWS, and then we'll transition to some of the more commonly asked features and architecture in the cloud. As many of you might know, the cloud is kind of the new norm. When you're starting a new project, you go into the cloud, you get started. And there's a lot of discussions about microservices and serverless architecture. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and then what services are related to those with Amazon Web Services like Cognito, API Gateway, and Lambda. And that'll kind of transition once we start building some of those features in Mobile Hub. You'll have a good understanding of what those mean because those are the kind of the core features of this architecture that we're building on. And then we'll talk about some of the new features in AWS Mobile Hub, some of the sign-in features with MFA and username and passwords, Facebook and Google. And then we have an import-export feature that we're releasing. And the bots, the Amazon Lex was just announced GA last week. And so we have an integration with bots to integrate that into your mobile apps. And then we'll go into Mobile Hub console. We'll go through a live demo, going through the console, creating a project, and building out some of those cool features. So they're feature-based and not necessarily service-based. So if, let's say, you want to do a file sharing feature, then you can go into Mobile Hub, create a project, and you can enable some of these file sharing features and sharing so that it enables some of these features, provisions them in the back end, and then it'll build a sample app for you to try out. And then if you like it, everything's working great, then you can go into our console documentation and look at how to integrate that into your own app. So it's really great. Literally, we can provision all the backend services, secure, scalable web in about 5 minutes. It's pretty amazing. And then we'll go over some of the code, if we have time, some of the code inside the project, and then we'll end it with answer a few questions that you guys might have through that you came up with during the conversation. So let's get started. Okay, so just like to talk to you about some of the customers of AWS. A lot of newcomers like say, oh, who's using AWS? Who's using mobile? And then here's a good example of some of the larger mobile apps out there: Periscope, Yelp, Netflix, Tinder, that are using a lot of the features that we're going to talk about, like S3 and Cognito and Gateway and some of those microservices technology. For instance, one's not listed here is Localytics, not known for the mobile, but they're a customer that has processes 1 billion data points in real time and uses Lambda, which is one of the microservices technology for running real-time mobile analytics. So to all the mobile users, if you guys ever used Localytics for push notifications or analytics, they use our services for that as well. So as we talked about earlier, microservices, serverless architecture. So we talked about as a mobile developer, we come in and we want to create this back end. And typically, if you've been in the industry for a while, there's the client-server paradigm where you would just set up a server running like Node or IS or whatever it might be, and you create an API behind it, and then maybe a load balancer if you're a busy site and busy mobile, and you connect that way. Well, the shift has been from these client-server technologies over to these microservices, serverless. That's not necessarily serverless, but think of them as serverless because what we're going to be doing is really just uploading code to one of our services, Lambda, which is one of the microservices, and then it executes the code on demand for some type of events or requests. So here's the evolution we talked about, where On-premise, you have an on-premise site, you deploy a bunch of servers, and you sometimes over-provision, like maybe you have your big sports app, and certain events are really high scale, and so you have to maybe over-provision certain physical devices, and that was kind of the old way to do it, the on-premise location. Then came along EC2, which is deploying minutes. You have this virtual environment where you can load balance and create these virtual environments to scale up automatically within minutes. And then it would scale down as you didn't need it. So these events or sports events would scale up and then go back down. You would only pay for what you use. Then there's ECS, which is the container service, which is deployed in seconds, live for minutes or hours, and then shuts down, and you only pay for what you use. Then we transition. Now we're into this serverless microservice, which is AWS Lambda, and you may have heard of it, but we'll discuss a little bit in more detail in a few minutes. But it's you're putting code into Lambda. Let's say let's talk about a function here that you want to do make thumbnails, and you have before you had an API and you had this code that transformed large photos into thumbnails. And if you have this code, you can upload it to Lambda. No server needed. You upload the code, and then you send Lambda the photo, and then Lambda will go and run that code, create a thumbnail, and then send it back to the user, and then shut down. So you're really paying nothing for storing that code, and you only pay for what you use. And then there's a nice generous free tier in there. So think about that versus you have a server standing by, your startup, you're paying for the server to run 24/7, getting ready, making a few API calls. You're paying for that per minute, per second, whatever it might be, versus Lambda now, we can execute within milliseconds, but you're not paying for anything when it's standing by. And when you really need it, and you're uploading like thousands of images at once, a big sporting event, you're sending all these photos out, it can scale and then handle all that load, and then again, scale back down, and you're only paying for what you use. So you can sleep at night, wake up the next day, things take off of the app, you'll be fine. So that's Lambda, and that's what we'll talk about when we talk about building cloud logic and API gateway and fronting the Lambda functions. So this is kind of another description of microservices, which is the self-contained units code. We talked about that thumbnail code running within Lambda. That's a microservice. And then the serverless piece is the developer run and scale apps in microservices, which is the Lambda functions. So you can see below there's all these apps coming in or events, whatever it is, and going into these microservices. So you could have one or many Lambda functions. And then Lambda functions can actually trigger other services like S3 or S3, which is one of our object storage for uploading those photos. It can also trigger Lambda, and then Lambda can trigger other things like DynamoDB or database or another HTTP endpoint, whatever it might be. So some of the benefits, we talked about like where it could scale and then scale back down. You only pay for what you use. And also when you're not using it at all, it's just hosting the code for you. So saves development time, hosts logic shares across apps in the cloud, and then you pay as you scale. Infrastructure costs are proportional to your growth. So, as you grow, then you pay for it. And if you're not using it on weekends, whatever it is, or maybe you just have seasonal type thing, it's really nice for those developers as well, because in season, when it's slow, you're really paying nothing. You just let it sit there. And then when you need it, it's ready to go. And you don't have to worry about auto-scaling configurations, CPU utilization, Apache configs, whatever it might be with server hardware. It takes care of that. And then you can, in the result, you can deliver just the reliable app experience with high availability. So think about this. You're just setting this thumbnail scenario. You have an app, upload photos, come back with thumbnails, and there's no servers running, and it's virtually free if you're not using it. So that's how easy it is to get started and how inexpensive it could be for startups to keep going. So here's the anatomy of serverless. This is kind of talked about, and I haven't talked about some of these services, but this is the kind of the view of things where you see the user log in. We're going to talk about Cognito. Remember, is one of those serverless features where you can have user login and credentials, and those are authenticating your users. And then it goes into API Gateway, which, again, is another service I'll talk about in a minute, and then Lambda. So Lambda, remember, is the one that runs the actual code, the business logic. And then API Gateway is just a fronted API in front of that. So it can manage your keys, it can authenticate for you, you can throttle, whatever you might be. Think about anything you want to do put in front of that Lambda function, like custom domain. You could switch regions, whatever it might be. That's kind of your front end, your gateway to the Lambda functions. And API Gateway can also trigger other things in Lambda. It could trigger your own HTTP endpoint, whatever it might be. And then from there, Lambda can trigger DynamoDB, which is our NoSQL database storage, SNS for push notifications, SMS, SES, whatever it might be. S3, we talked about S3 can go both ways. So S3 is our storage. We upload these photos into S3, and then S3 can trigger Lambda, and then also Lambda can trigger S3. So let's say it makes a thumbnail. It may store the thumbnail in S3 bucket along with the original file that the user uploaded. So you kind of get the whole piece of cloud identity, which will enable in Mobile Hub, cloud logic, and then cloud storage and messaging. And then, but the exciting part about this is all these services. You got Cognito for authentication, Gateway, Lambda, and then maybe another service in the back end to function. What Mobile Hub is going to do for us is going to take all these pieces together and make it kind of a feature. So we could say, yes, we want login, we want this feature, we want storage. And it'll put it together in this nice, secure, scalable, fully functional app for you to go run through and connect into your services. So a lot of customers like it for proof of concept, getting started. Projects are really fast. They go in there, they get it enabled, and then they can run it. And then maybe they just want the push notification feature, and they can go to our documentation and then integrate that with their existing app, and then it's running against your own resources. So it's really important to know. So we talked about Lambda a little bit, so I'll go into detail about Lambda, API Gateway, and then Cognito, and then we'll follow into Mobile Hub and how those features tie in. So Lambda, run your code without managing the infrastructure. You pay for only what you consume, easy to develop and deploy, and then it continuously scales and monitor, which we talked about, but some people like the visual, so I wanted to provide the visual here to kind of see the transition of it. And also we have Java is the language. Python, we just now support the 3.6 last week, and Node.js, and now C#, which is the .NET Core framework to run on those Lambda features. And so if you know any of those codes, you run through and you can code any of those solutions and run that thumbnail, whether it's Node.js or Python or Java. Okay, some other pieces of information about the Lambda. It's a functional unit of application logic. And again, we've talked about invoking via event triggers or sync request response. It is a stateless model, so it's just you send the request in and there's no state on that. It's kind of like a RESTful interaction. And then independently packaged, deployable, and scalable units. So these are totally self-contained units that run on their own, and then each one is taken care of by Lambda service. And then the applications are closed, a loosely coupled collection of microservices. Think about, instead of having all these servers relying on each other, just think of all these decoupled things that you want to make a function run, and then they're not relying on other features to occur. If anything happens to one of those services, it's not relying on those. Okay, here's a couple, or 6 examples of using Lambda. So we have your typical REST API. Remember, mobile device, connection to API gateway, and we'll talk about gateway in just probably like a minute. But remember, that's your gateway to Lambda. So you can contact Lambda directly if you'd like, but it's nice to have this gateway because you can actually resell. Customers use API gateway to resell an API. So if you're starting up and you have this really great API, let's say you're a really large weather company and you have a great API and you're offering weather service, you can resell to developers to enhance their apps and offer weather features and using your API, and you could sell them your API keys and then use that and build them through API Gateway. It's really great that way. And then it goes back into their Lambda functions, and then they can control, like I said, keys. You can have them authenticate username and passwords, whatever it might be. So it'll block them at the gateway before they even get to the end of your functions. And then we have these event things where it goes back and forth. If I upload that image to S3 for thumbnails, it can trigger a Lambda function. As soon as that image is uploaded, it automatically triggers Lambda. Lambda creates a thumbnail, and then Lambda sends it back into S3 to store that thumbnail. So think about this programmable web thing working really well, and you're not worried about anything because it's just behind the scenes, all these computers are talking to each other. These are really important, like triggers, webhooks, all that is set up for you, and just simply say S3 got a bucket, I want it anytime something's uploaded, deleted, whatever it might be, trigger this Lambda function, and then have Lambda do whatever you want, any kind of like business logic, send a push notification, send an email, whatever automation you want to have in. And then the event pool. So we have DynamoDB. Let's say if you've ever done a database trigger, I used to love those things. They could get really messy, but database triggers are great. Every time somebody uploads something to a row, you can have that stream to Lambda, and then Lambda could pull it in and do whatever they want with it, manipulate it. Again, the orders could come in through through Dynamo, or you can have through SQS, whatever it might be. And then scheduled events. So we talked about event-driven. We have scheduled events. So think of like every hour, every 2 hours, you need to run a process, and you need to go check something out or check inventory, whatever it might be. You can have that Lambda function run every hour. So remember this, you upload the code, it sits there, pay nothing, and then you upload or trigger it every hour. So you're not having any user interaction, it's just from the trigger, it runs every hour, every 2 hours, whatever it might be, and then Lambda can send off a report, whatever you want to do with it. So that's really nice to have those scheduled events by hour, by day, week, whatever. And then the next one is invocating using custom event source. So Android SDK can contact Lambda directly. Remember we talked about it can be invoked directly, asynchronously, or via API gateway. But this is showing you contacting Lambda directly. And then the custom authentication flow, which is where Cognito, which is the authenticated part of the microservices, and it can authenticate and flow into Lambda and execute Lambda functions that way. Okay, so let's go into Cognito. Cognito is really important, especially for mobile developers. It's one of those core features that every developer should integrate with. Even if you don't have users sign in via Facebook or username and password, it's really important to have them given a unique identifier. So if you don't have anybody logging in, Cognito will give you this unauthenticated identity that allows them to have limited access to your resources. So you know who they are, you can limit it based on that user, whatever you want to do. But before this, before Cognito came about, it was, you get a key and you secret, you put it in your app, and then you execute it. Problem with that is people can find out that key, reverse engineer, whatever it might be. And then if something went wrong, you have maybe, 3 to 10 days before you can upload to some of the app stores to be able to change that key out, and you can run into a lot of trouble there. So this one gives them limited time privilege access to your resources. And you can have them log in via Facebook, Google, Twitter, or any of the open IDs, and then it'll create a temporary key and password for that user, and then access those services like S3, API Gateway, and DynamoDB. And I'll have an example when I run in the app. I'll show you where we can access one of the APIs when I'm logged in, but if I log out, it's automatically denied. So it's just kind of the by default sets up. And the guest access is, again, it gives you that unauthenticated identity to access those resources so that nobody outside the app can access at all, but anybody using the app can at least get use some of the resources. And then later on, if you want them to upgrade or log in, you can do that. So here's one of the flows. So a lot of times this is confusing for folks trying to understand this flow. So we put this together to kind of like show how easy it is to sign in, and then the Cognito service returns access tokens and IDs. And then what you do is, as the user in the SDK, it sends those tokens and creates these scope credentials. Remember we talked about key and secret? The key and secret is temporary for just a limited time for that user specifically, and then it's been given to you by Cognito, and then they can access those resources in there. And what's important about that, two things, is where the app user is the only ones accessing it. They're logged in so you can track them. And then they can have certain features, like let's say you have a notes app and these users want to create their own notes, private notes. Then when they log in, every time they create a note, they only can read notes or add to their own notes within that DynamoDB table or access that S3 bucket. So a really good example is file sharing, and I can show you this on the demo app, is a user goes into the app, they upload a photo, they can only upload a photo to the public folder. But if they log in, they can upload to their own private folder that's shared only to them. So it's really, you're just creating this this cloud storage feature within 5 minutes to allow this user to privately store objects in their own folder, and then they could share them out later to other users. So it's really great to have this set up where you have this functionality and the scope of narrowing down access for these users. Okay, so that was Cognito. So now we'll talk about Gateway, which is, the Gateway is just a front-end API that's usually backed by the Lambda function. So API Gateway can take those authenticated users from Cognito, or you can give them a username and password outside, or you can give them like a token. It generates tokens for you. So we talked about that reselling of like a weather app. You can use API Gateway to say, okay, here reselling all these tokens, and then you can throttle, or you can set up pricing, whatever it might be. And then when they call the API Gateway, that goes in and transforms the request into Lambda function. So you have the API development, performance at scale, security controls by default, and then you can monitor and meter the API activity. That's really important because you can monitor all the users coming in, who's using what keys, all that information is there available to you, and then you can cut them off at that gateway if you don't want certain users to come in. And what's really nice to have, you can create resources, and your typical verbiage for like a RESTful endpoint, you create like let's say a cat resources, and then you can have all your users upload photos of cats or whatever it might be. And then that will go into the Lambda function. The Lambda function could react accordingly depending on what resources. Like you may even have like a Lambda function that could respond to a dog resource, and then a different Lambda function to respond to cat resource. Or you could have the same Lambda function respond to both, however you want to do it. So here's the structure of it. We talk about mobile in this discussion, but a lot of it's web apps, IoT, services, whatever it is, going into a serverless API. So API Gateway is fronted with CloudFront, so it gives you those many edge points that we offer around the world for the global deployment. And then it'll go into API Gateway, which tracks the CloudWatch logs, and then it also goes, you can offer caching. So if you have certain requests that you want to be cached, a gateway can also cache those in front of the gateway before it even goes to any of the Lambda functions or Amazon EC2 or whatever. So this kind of shows you that flow where gateway is the controller, the traffic controller to all these different functions, and going into internal AWS services, or it can go into publicly accessible endpoints if you want. All right, so that was it. So we talked about Cognito, which is the authentication piece to get your users authenticated into your resources. API Gateway, which is the gateway front end to your Lambda function, and then ended with the Lambda functions being the business logic to produce and do all your business logic features. So now we're transitioning into some of the bots, so I could talk to you about that. And then when we get into provisioning some of these resources in Mobile Hub, we'll have knowledge of all those pieces. So talk about bots. Recently, Amazon Lex just went general availability to everyone last week. And in response, we had same-day support for Amazon Lex and Mobile Hub. So as a mobile developer, you can create a chatbot and integrate that with your mobile device quickly. So it creates this integration with the SDK. And you can integrate with voice or text, and or you can import an existing chatbot created in the Amazon Lex console. So I want to talk about the top three, the Lex, recognition, and Poly. So Lex is really just takes your natural voice and translate it into text. And then Poly, the third one down there, is really just taking text and turning it into lifelike speech. Last week we just announced certain things where it's becoming really smart, like Poly can understand like certain whispers, and then she could respond like, why are you whispering to me? And she could actually change the voice and say, why are you yelling at me? We're not really yelling, but so the great thing is Poly has taken on this lifelike speech, and it's been really cool to play with it and interact with it and do things. And then Lex is just that piece. Think of it as another enhancement to your app. So you have API calls and you're doing your thing in the mobile app. Amazon Lex just really enables that enhancement for users to use natural language that translate into those API calls. That's all. Just think about that. Don't worry about the machine learning right now, but if you guys would just want to go into the the console, create this this chat app. You can interact and play with it and kind of see how it works with your business and how it works with your app, and then you can interact with it. And again, all Lex does is takes your voice is like ABC123. It'll translate that into the text, and then it'll send it off to Lambda function, or it could do its own translation and utterances and say, okay, I need more information, and then you go back to Lambda, and then until everything's fulfilled, and then Lambda can fulfill that with requests, whatever it might be. And we give some examples like ordering flowers or making an appointment is a good example. Like you could just say order flowers, and then come back and say, oh, what type of flowers would you like? And then you say tulips. And then if tulips aren't one of the options, it'll come back and kind of create this conversation back and forth. And it's really great because then you create this valuable interface for these users. So imagine, think of it like Alexa. If anybody has used Alexa in the home, you can create lights and everything, but take the piece out of that and then make it more mobile, make it IoT, whatever it might be, and it could constantly be listening to you, whatever you want it to do, and you can make commands just by using your voice. So that's Amazon Lex and Polly. And then Amazon Recognition is the image recognition piece where you upload a photo to it or many photos, and it can identify certain things like explicit material. It can look for sunsets and dogs and cats, and then you could teach it to learn certain type of people, so all your friends. It can view and recognize certain things and then categorize that. So let's say you're uploading a photo of a sunset in Hawaii with your family. It may be able to categorize that. So just like personally, I'd like to use it, throw it up there, and you can get these all categorized. So like say my son, his name is Iron, and then you can go through or sunset in Hawaii. Then I can just go search in my my list later and say, give me all the sunsets with my son in there or something like that, or all Hawaii shots with my son. And then it'll pull up all those pictures, and Amazon Recognition can do that for you. And then you can go deeper, of course, for, like think of like military or law enforcement type things that you might be able to use recognition for as well. And with the mobile app, it's great because it's fully integrated, and then any photos you upload, you can automatically go to recognition, and then it can come back and tell you all the pieces that are inside there and categorize those photos. And then machine learning is all kind of the pieces of it. Lex, recognition, Poly, all of it is using machine learning behind the scenes, and you can create these models to actually make it smarter. So those are the pieces in there, and we integrate with Lex and recognition and Poly, and you'll be able to see those in a few minutes. So some of the discussions about voice and chat bots, it's been big since the Alexa skills were developed. We have thousands of those, 2.5 billion messages, app users, and then 33% of all customer support interactions still need human interaction. So there's a lot of discussion about bots and voice, and that's been around for a while, but the technology is way more advanced now. And if you just go and try a few things, you'll realize some of those natural voice things that you've done before where it's not reliable, it's now very reliable, and you can actually make commands, and you don't ever actually have to touch your device if you don't need to. So simple, complex user flows. You can understand user intents, and then personalized experiences, and then automatic complex business processes, so it's tied into the Lambda function. Like I said, if you have it just sitting there, it's not doing anything, then you make these commands, you can trigger whatever you want, and then it'll cause the Lambda function to execute and then come back, and the Lex will actually manage that conversation for you. Okay. So let's talk about more towards the back end. We're going to talk about some of the features that mobile developers use for backend and how that ties into Amazon Web Services. So we're talking about user identity. So now we're going to talk about some of these services, and then when we talked earlier about API Gateway and Cognito, that should make a lot of sense. The user identity piece, which is a lot of this generic mobile developers need user identity for sharing, syncing, identity. We need to collect their username, passwords. I like to collect social security numbers, whatever it is. Push notifications is a really nice one to have. Engagement, you got to engage your users. So push notifications is another feature that commonly mobile developers will enable. Content delivery, files. So you got a lot of files, objects, videos, whatever it is, and you want to share those to your mobile developers. That's a common place. And analytics, very important. Almost every app I create, I start with analytics. It can track those users. You see exactly what they're doing, where they're coming from, and that lets you guys go back and figure out what the next steps and the roadmap, figure out what you need to do, and then also what's going on, what's wrong, what are the users playing with. And then it's really nice to know what devices they're on. So like, let's say you're working on a feature for iOS 10, and you want to look at how many people are on iOS 10 or how many people are on iOS 8, and you realize a good portion of them, or you have an Android device, and you have to deal with the fragmentation, and you want to create this game that's probably the latest and greatest, but you might not be able to have your users download it because they have older devices. So with analytics, you'll be able to tell and make those decisions. And then with analytics, you could tie that into pinpoint. So engagement, you could say like, if you have a problem, let's say a bug in iOS 10, a new feature came out, you didn't catch it, you can actually collect the information, say all my iOS 10 users, and I can contact them and send a push notification, say, hey guys, we're working on this, everything's good, we'll send an update to the App Store. It should be pending in a few days, so take a look for it. So those kind of things where you can engage those users that are only affected and not have to engage all those like the Androids or the iOS 8 users that might not be affected by this bug. So it's really nice to collect those analytics. If you're not collecting them, you can't engage those users. So application logic is the piece we talked about before, which is all the API stuff. API gateway fronted with fronting Lambda and making those API calls. And we can create those in Mobile Hub as well. And what we haven't talked about is the last piece is users and mobile devices. We talk about fragmentation. We want to be able to test devices. So we want to be able to test on real devices. So we have a service called Device Farm. Device Farm has all real phones on iOS or Android, and we have these devices that you can test your app. So you would create your app, you build it, and then you would run it on these set of devices. Let's say you want to run it on the top 5. You can select the top 5 Android devices and then run through. You could have it run code that you like, Appium or whatever scripts you have running. You can run through certain business logic, or you could just upload it to us and we'll run like a fuzz test, which is like, punch and type things and do all these cool things to it, and then take a video or a screenshot and then send you this really nice report to say, here's what happened on an iPhone 7S, and here's what happened on a Android whatever device it might be, and here's your report, so you can kind of decide on how things are working, especially that game we talked about where you want to test on some of the latest or maybe some of the older Android devices, and you really need a physical device to test on. These are real factory devices, unwrapped, plugged into our system, and then you can use them. And you also have the access to remote access in the console if you want to just upload and interact with the app manually. You can do that. So those are the kind of back-end features that are available to mobile developers. And then we'll transition into what that means for some of these services. So what Mobile Hub is going to do is take these services and put into these features like auth and server logic and synchronized data. And you can see these icons and how they interact with the Amazon Web Services. So when we say storage sharing or share media, we talk about S3, and then deliver media or push notifications, we're talking about Pinpoint or SNS. So we want to just more focus on feature-based, provided by, or by Amazon Pinpoint, or store data, via DynamoDB or whatever it might be. So let's kind of give you a view of what your mobile app would look like and all these mobile services. So leading into Mobile Hub, mobile developers come to us and say, okay, great, I see AWS has all these services. You go to the console and you see all these compute and code deploy and IoT and light sales. Like, okay, where do I get started? So what we've taken is all these pieces that I've highlighted in red and pulled them into some of those more commonly used mobile features that you asked for, like Cognito and Device Farm, Mobile Analytics, Lambda, S3, DynamoDB. They're not necessarily all only mobile, but these are the common features that are used by mobile developers. And then we put them into Mobile Hub to allow you to create those and with default security and scalability. So here's what it might look like when we do sample app. We enable Cognito, user identity, let's say username and password. And then inside the mobile app that we create, a fully functional app, it'll have the identity provider SDKs. We provide a login screen, for example, like, Facebook isn't that difficult to integrate, but having that piece of integrating with Facebook, having a sample dialogue, and then having that token create these limited privileged access to your resources is really great, especially getting started. There's no piece that doesn't work. It just kind of seamlessly connects into your resources. And then when you're done, you could destroy the project if you want, or just keep going or integrate into your own app. So here's kind of the hub and the wheel, some of the services that we've talked about that we highlighted in the red box: Cognito, SNS, Pinpoint, and Identity. So here's the console, and we'll run through a demo here in a few minutes. And so we're going to log in the console and create a project, and I'll show you some of these features where you can see like sign in, let users sign in with public identities or your own. So it'll allow you to create, allow users to log in with username and password, or they could log in with their phone number, or they could log in Facebook. And then some of the different features like NoSQL, notice how they're just feature-based. I want user data storage. You don't really need to know, S3. So what does like user data storage will create an S3 bucket and then run it with Cognito. So allow that, remember we talked about private public folders. So when you enable it, it'll create a bucket and create these folders for you with some sample images. So that when you launch the app, you can upload and download photos to the public folder. And then if you want to log in, if you allow them to log in, they can have access to the private folder within that bucket to give you that full use case scenario. And then analytics is default. What it does is just enables the SDK. You load the app, immediately starts tracking sessions, and will track the devices. Then within a few minutes, you'll see it in the Pinpoint dashboard, so you can track. And then it also provides a few custom events. So if monetization events, certain levels increased, whatever it might be, you could send these custom events that the user triggered from the mobile app. So here's what it looks like. This is the sample app that we're talking about. So fully functional. This is what differentiates our service a little bit. Is the fully functional app gives you Android device or an Android project, an iOS Swift, or an iOS Objective-C fully functional app. And so we're creating these backend resources, and at the same time, it's building these fully functional apps. So you don't have to go into like GitHub and build and compile, and hopefully it's not outdated or anything. This is real time. It's built and gives you examples of what it might look like with connecting into your own app. So like when you do a sign in, you'll be able to sign in, look at what that flow might look like, and then do content delivery or app analytics, whatever, send a custom event. All those features are available in this app, so you can demo, make sure it works, and then you can go back in and integrate it in your own app. So right now we offer the native Java Android, so you can open it up in Android Studio, and then iOS Swift and Objective-C, you would download the zip and then open it up in Xcode and run it right away. So some of the features we talk about when we download the Android or the iOS, we already integrate the mobile SDKs. These are some of the mobile SDKs that are available to you, even outside of Mobile Hub, but we integrate those for you. So we have the iOS Swift and Objective-C, the Android SDK, Windows SDK, and then Xamarin, Unity, and React Native in beta. So for any of the React Native or cross-platform developers, we offer those as well. But for right now, Mobile Hub creates the top two, the iOS and the Android native apps for you. So some of the highlighted features I want to talk about, which is fairly new for some users if you're familiar with Mobile Hub, but in the last several months, we've added the Cognito user pools, which is the username and password. So you no longer have to create this database and create these users to scale. And what it also does is it manages the whole life cycle. So if anybody is integrated with username and passwords, people forget their passwords all the time. So what happens is like you're totally manage that system, and you need to create codes, you need to authenticate, make sure they have the right email address. Cognito user pools takes care of that. And I'll show you in the app when you create a user, that user can be confirmed by email, and then they can log into the app and they're authenticated. That whole flow is taken care of. You can even have MFA enabled, you can have text, somebody can log in with their phone number, whatever it might be. And then they can support SAML, and then other social identities that can come up like Facebook and Google, whatever it might be, to connect into your services. So user sign-in, this is the flow in Mobile Hub when it creates this app, this flow. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes is creating this access to this public and private we talked about. So you log in with user pools or identity, does the sign-in, and then behind the scenes it goes through IAM, which is that role piece where you can fine-grain access per user and then they can have access to public or private resources as you see fit. And then here's the flow of what the Amazon Lex conversation looks like. So it goes into the app, and then user input goes into the engine, and then comes back as text to Poly. And then again, there's little pieces of the puzzle. So building these out manually would be, you'd have to kind of strategically look at all these different pieces, and if one piece is missing, then you kind of like looking back like where to go wrong. What we've done is integrated this directly with Lex, and you can enable these bots automatically into the app and then integrate it into your own if you'd like. So it just shows you the flow of that, how that interacts with the speech engine, goes back to the Lambda business logic, also tracking along the way of utterances, and any failures, anything there will be monitored with CloudWatch, and then it'll call to any of the services there. So here's what it looks like when we talked about, this one's booking flight. I talked about flowers, this one book a flight, and then the interaction will go through Lex, and then API gateway back to Lambda. Remember we talked about, so Lex will manage that voice conversation back and forth. Okay, great, I got all this information. And then once it decides that it has all the intents, all the stuff ready to go, this information it needs, it'll go back to gateway or Lambda and say, okay, Lambda, take care of it. And then inside your logic says, okay, it has all the pieces, I can fulfill this order, and then I'm going to book it. And then it go into your on-premise booking system or into your own database and say, okay, great. And then sends it back to Lex, and Lex spits it out via Poly, the information like you've been booked for Anchorage, Alaska on this date, and then full confirmation. Would you like me to send you an email? And then you say yes, and then everything works great, and you've never actually touched the screen at all. So that's kind of the interaction there, and that's available through the Lex console, or you want to integrate it through Mobile Hub. All right, so now let's build app. I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to run through a scenario through here. So as you come into the console, anybody's been here before, they have certain features, and you can search through them if Mobile Hub isn't there, which I see it here, and then it comes up Mobile Hub, and we're going to log into here. And so I already created a project webinar, so I wanted to go back and just in case this took a while, I wanted to create a new project, and we'll call it Live, and then it's going to be in the US East region. And what this is just a placeholder to say, okay, now it's ready to go. We're going to create all these features. So let's go. We're going to do a few features, and then we'll build the app and run it. So sign in, we talked about Facebook login. All these are just 1-2 clicks away. So you say email and password enabled. I want to enable them to log in with username and email. I'm going to disable multi-factor. Remember, that's where the additional code will be sent to you if you want to log in. And then I don't want to be so restrictive, so I'm going to go 6, check, 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 and create. And so right there, behind the scenes, is creating this user pool for us, and then building that app, getting it ready so that it's going to prompt us for a username and password, allow us to create a user, whatever it might want to do. Okay, so let's go back. So now it shows us that we've enabled user sign-in. That's it, we're done. So then we can go into Cloud Logic. So Cloud Logic, remember, is that piece that's API Gateway and Lambda. It's fronted by Lambda. And we can create an API, and let's do like we talked about the cat API. So QCats, and let's restrict it to sign-in users only. And then I want to change it to a resource. If you guys are familiar with RESTful interface, we'll do just a cat resource, save it, and I'm going to call this my cat handler. And what this is going to do, it creates an API gateway and a Lambda function for you with security. Remember we checked that box that said allow force users to log in. So nobody can access this API unless they're logged into the app, which I'll be able to show you in a minute. So while that builds, we can go back here, and then let's do a quick connection to user data storage. 1 click away, we say yes, save, and right there it just creates this S3 bucket with that public and private folder in there, and with a few sample images, so when you want to go back in and demo, you can upload to public and then private if you've logged in. So that's it. So now we're done. We have all these features enabled. We just go to integrate, and then right now it's building a little bit of the CloudFormation for the Cloud Logic. But when that's ready, we'll be able to download the sample app in iOS Swift, Objective-C, or Android. And so we got there. So we'll let that build. Just takes a few minutes. and then we'll download that zip file, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So the zip file would look like this, and then we open it up, and this is I did the Swift project, and this is the same configuration I did before. So you double click on this, and it'll launch Xcode for us. So the only thing I did here was I put in a bundle identifier and then had it signed for me. And then let's go ahead and run it on like a 6S, and we'll take a look. So again, everything's built out. All the Swift code is done for me in configuration, connecting into my resources that I just created. So then we'll go down here. Hopefully you guys can see this little simulator launching. And this is that fully functional app we talked about that's built out and has all those features. This one has some of the more features enabled, but I'll talk to you about like this. So user sign in. Remember, so we're not signed in now, and we can if we wanted to, say you use username and password. And then let's go back to Cloud Logic feature where we talked about, remember we had to like log in. So I want to go ahead and just like, these are simple gets, puts, these are just samples of executing your API. And then I want to do a get and then invoke. And it should fail. So it says credentials is not authorized to perform because we're not logged in. Remember we did that one little checkbox. So the whole system just blocks us out because we're not authenticated. So then if we go back in, and we want to go into sign in, I created a user earlier, so I'm just going to go Dennis and then put in my password. Whoa, wrong password. Oh, I forgot my password. So I could click there, it would send an email out, and I could reset it. So it's a good example, like how could I forget my password? I just set it up 10 minutes ago. Ah, there we go. Okay, so see it says sign out. So now let's go back into Cloud Logic feature, the demo, their cats, get, and invoke. There we go. So that's simple as that, where we blocked all access unless you logged in, or if you want. I mean, you don't have to lock everybody out unless they log in, so you have those options. And then we talked about one quick demo on the user storage. So we have these files that we uploaded, so example image, so public folder and private folder. So I uploaded a waterfall before, but I can upload right here, click on this, and again, these features are already enabled and allow you to do the sample app where it has access to your photo album. You can just collect another picture, so you collect it here, and then do a leaf.png, and then done, and then it's uploading to S3 in my bucket in the public folder. So other people will be able to see this leaf, and then if I go to private, I can upload a folder or download or do whatever I want. So it kind of gives you that whole cycle through of logging in. This private would not be available if I was logged out. And so that's kind of the demo process here. And again, it automatically started the session tracking and everything else with analytics. But you can also do some demo analytics like we talked about, custom event. Right there is triggered, and a monetization event. These are custom events that you want to be able to track for when users do certain things in your app, and you can track it and analyze it. So that's it. That's for the sample app. That's the demo. And then here's the code that you want to work through. And you can see where your endpoints are set up. And then when you're done testing this out with this app, you can go into our documentation and actually integrate into your own app using some of the, like, I want push notifications, and there'll be a dialog there to activate some of those features specifically. And that's it for the demo. Switch back. All right, and now we just want to allow a few minutes, so maybe collect Karthik or Weston or Peter if they had any common questions. We'll take a look at those and address any questions you guys had. Okay, we're back. We got a few questions here. So Daniel asked the Cognito provide a user registration process, or does it only allow access via third-party identity providers? So it does both. So it integrates with any of those third-party providers, and then the registration process is the user pools piece we talked about, where user pools is managing that username and password. So it's your database, you create these users, or you can create admins to user and automate it, and then it comes with that whole flow of when users forget their password, or you can go in and create codes for them to authenticate email addresses, whatever. So yes, Cognito can do both. it'll do third party and then username and password for your app. From AJ, can I use Xamarin SDK with AWS Mobile Hub? Currently, AWS Mobile Hub offers the native Java for Android and iOS Swift and Objective-C for iOS devices. But we do fully support the Xamarin SDK, and go take a look at those features, but those are fully enabled in for Xamarin and supports the .NET Core as well. And then we have a question about device farm has not been updated in a long while. There are some old devices. Yes, we're constantly evolving in the devices on device farm. You'll see a lot of the older devices that actually customers are requesting because some of those devices aren't online. For example, some of the old Android devices, maybe where people are trying to upgrade or having issues with them, so they'll want to test on these older devices. And another good one is you'll see iOS, like, you know, an 8 or a 9 running iOS 9, even though we know 95% of the iOS device users have uploaded the latest iOS. And that's a good purpose for device farm, is because we are probably the only ones who have an iOS device with iOS 8 on it, you know, and so we haven't upgraded those. So you can use those for testing those iOS 8 users who haven't upgraded. So, and we're constantly evolving into some of the new devices and getting those onboarded, and you'll see those come online soon. From AJ, what are the best practices to use when using EC2 versus Lambda? We did talk about EC2, but EC2 is the virtual environment, and we can connect into those features as you want. So if you want to do connect into EC2 versus Lambda, you could still have the API gateway, and then API gateway will transform into an HTTP request into your EC2 instance. So you can still run EC2, Windows Server, Apache, whatever it might be, create an API there, and then API gateway can connect into it, still have that full gateway control into your EC2 instance. Lambda is great for everything, but if you want to have your EC2 instance running, you can do that. And you can actually have Lambda connect and call the API from your EC2 instance as well. So I would set up the API gateway so you have a front end to it, and then you can have it call wherever you want, Lambda or an EC2 running an API. Are there any, this is from Eswar, Reddy, are there any additional costs for AWS Mobile Hub? That's a really good question. So AWS Mobile Hub is a service that aggregates all the other AWS services. And each service within Mobile Hub, it has their own tiers, so their own pricing and free tier. So in each feature you enable, there's a section on pricing that you can click on and get an idea of what it is. But for the most part, these services have a really generous free tier. So developing these apps, the sample app what we just brought up, and running it through testing, you'll pay next to nothing because you'll always be in that free tier for most of those, the storage, the DynamoDB, and the content, all that. So you'll be able to set it up. And then if you're worried about it, when you go back into the project, you can actually click the top right, there's an X, and it destroys all your resources right there. It'll let you, you want to confirm, but you can tear down all those resources so you're not paying for anything. Even though Lambda, you're not paying for anything, and you're not paying for any of the other services like push notifications unless you use them, but like maybe DynamoDB or some of the other services might charge, so you feel safe or feel comfortable deleting that entire project and moving on to the next one, you can do so. And then I think Javier had the same kind of similar question where is there cost involved in Mobile Hub? So yeah, take a look at some of those features that when you enable, there's a pricing section for each, and then a link to that specific, like if you're enabling Cloud Logic, there's a piece where you can look at the pricing for API Gateway or Lambda, or the object storage feature, you can go into, click on the pricing for S3 and see exactly what the pricing might be. So don't worry about things just going out of control. Take a look at those pricing. Most of them have the free tier, and then you can manage them that way, figure out, and then again, you can destroy those resources if you'd like. And I think that's about it for the questions.
Again, thanks so much for a great presentation today, Dennis. Super informative and really engaging as well, so that was wonderful. Thanks also to our moderators. Our moderators have been typing away since I gave you all the challenge to test their typing skills. So thank you for submitting questions, and thank you to our moderators as well. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. If you have any feedback on any of our previous or upcoming webinars, as well as any ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please reach out to us. Drop us a line at aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Again, everybody, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.